listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time, once again, for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan.
And I'm former CIA officer John Kiriakou.
And this is The Backstory. Now, John, I take it you were out of town, correct?
Yes, sir. I'm in Bedford, New Hampshire.
How's that going? How's the weather there?
It's the weather's pretty miserable. It's about 28 and snowy and icy, cloudy. But I genuinely like New Hampshire. I like the attitude of most people up here. This is the live free or die state. And there's just a lot to do. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's Maine. But yeah, 28 does seem a little tropical to me. It was 13 here yesterday in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And the motto here is live, freeze, or die. See what I'm saying? There's three. You can live, freeze, or die. It's possible.
Yes, indeed.
And then I needed some coffee this morning. There's a Starbucks 2 blocks away. And I don't drive. So I was up at like 6:30 in the morning, and I've got a full-on mask. And someone asked me on Twitter if I've joined Antifa. No, I'm a little more stylish because I had a pattern on my mask. Just saying. It's very cold here. So 28 sounds nice.
Oof. I don't envy you. I don't.
We had anytime. You're welcome. Anytime, John. Come on up. Now, I will say we got a great show today, particularly with all the stuff going on with Ukraine. George Samueli is joining us. He just did a great appearance, by the way, with Peter Lavelle over on Crosstalk, getting
terrific.
raves for it. Yeah.
Great.
A lot of people liked his appearance there. Then, and by the way, no calls for the first 45 minutes because he's coming on in about 10 minutes by the time I get done with this stuff. And then next hour, then we got 45 minutes. Top of the hour is probably the best time to call. And we got Carter Laren joining us as well. So it's a great action-packed show today. It's The Backstory. Now, the headline, one of the big headlines, John, broke last night just as the show was ending, that the CDC, which because of the Omicron variant, had suggested people self-quarantine for 10 days. They halved it. They went down to 5 days last night.
Now, if you are vaccinated and boosted and test positive, but you are asymptomatic, you can cut your quarantine from 10 days to 5 days.
Now, I'm going to go with what I said the other day. This is turning into a bureaucratic nightmare for the Biden administration, because also this is sending a somewhat conflicting message, as is the fact that they've taken the travel ban off of 8 African nations, right? It's sending a conflicting message when Fauci goes on the Sunday shows and says, hey, you're going to have to wear a mask for a long time. It's confusing, right?
I'm not confused by it because I follow this stuff as part of, our job, and I get down into the weeds. It's complicated, and yes, I agree with you that I think most people are going to be confused, but it makes sense based on what we know right now, to me.
Well, yeah, and the problem is, and I've said this before too, I think part of the problem is that there's no, if I may steal a term from Black Panther Party, minister of information. That's what they need, right?
Right.
They need
right.
someone that's a little Orwellian sounding, but they need somebody, and that person needs to be a person with some independence who says, I'm just going to present the facts.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to promote a certain political agenda. That's up to the politicians. My job is just to say, here's what we know.
Yes.
And then go from
I agree
there.
with that. I agree with that. And I think one of the things that makes so many Americans angry is that advice changes as our understanding of the disease changes. And people see that as irrational policy, that our politicians don't know what they're doing. The policy is constantly changing. Yeah, it is constantly changing, but it's constantly changing based on what we know or what we are yet to learn. So it feels confusing. It sounds confusing, but I'm not blaming anybody.
It also seems to me they may have jumped the gun a little bit on some things. For instance,
Several times.
they banned travel from those 8 African nations very quickly.
Yes.
Very quickly. And
Yeah,
all I'm saying is,
within 36 hours of the discovery that the disease had made its way through Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam.
no, that's where you were recently.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing that out. Now, by the way, Austin Pelley is with us. I think Austin's, is he there? Okay. We got a message from Austin. He was not feeling well this morning. And so I don't want to diminish the fact that he's not feeling well, because I've said, I've got a friend who's got COVID, so do you. But let me posit something else, if I may, John. Imagine you had a friend, and they walked up to you and they said, hey, John, how's it going? And you're like, good. Haven't seen you in a while. They were like, yeah, I was out in Hawaii, and I was in the water surfing, and I was attacked by a shark, and a shark bit my leg. And at first, you're like, oh, that's horrible. And then you said, wait. You're walking up to me and telling me this. And the person says, oh, yeah, it was an Omicron shark.
Right.
And
Not
you're
like the poor guy in Morro Bay a few days ago.
Well, right. Or if I said to you, John, I got bad news at the doctors. I have cancer. And you're like, oh, my God. And I said, but it's Omicron cancer. It's cancer of the hair.
Right.
They're going to go cut it off, and I'll be fine. Here's what I'm saying. My brother, by the way, I want to give full credit. That line was my brother's. Cancer of the hair, that was my brother Ken's. God bless him. Now, the reason I say this is it seems to me like if you get COVID now with the Omicron variant, it's kind of lame, right? It's not like a year ago when if you were diagnosed with COVID.
Yeah, you're like, oh, crap, I hope he doesn't die. Now it's like, well, you'll be better in a few days.
What, is he going to sniffle on me? Because that's what, and again, I'm sure some people have had, first off, the Delta variant and other variants are still out there. So just because someone gets sick with COVID-19 now, you don't know that they've got the Omicron variant. But I'm saying that the Omicron variant is, if I may use this phrase, hurting the brand. Right? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
In other words, they're making COVID-19 kind of lame, as my shark cancer analogy was intended to show. Not, by the way, I want to offend. If anyone out there is dealing with a shark with cancer, I'm sure it's very painful. So I'm not making light of it. I'm just saying that the Omicron variant's kind of, like I say, it's kind of weird. What say you, John?
I have to agree with you. Like you say, Lee, a year ago, if you heard somebody had gotten COVID, your first thought was, oh, my God, I hope he doesn't have to go on a ventilator. I hope he doesn't die, right? And we've got these daily tallies of the dead on CNN and MSNBC. And now it's like, okay, well, you might have a little bit of body aches and sniffles, runny nose. You're going to be fine.
Now, let me also say, and let me push back a little on something you were saying. I think there are some real screw-ups the administration has done recently. And let me talk about testing for a second. Biden had a talk to, did you see he was talking to all the different governors?
Yes.
So, and they right now are saying, oh, we're going to have we'll have the test in a few weeks. But it's someone on the news, a newscaster said this. But people want the test now.
Yeah.
Right?
People want the test now. I went to Walgreens this morning, and the first thing you see when you walk in the door is this big sign: "We have no tests." And that's how it is everywhere.
And the other problem is, I've heard some places they have lines that are a block long or 2 blocks long waiting for the test. Right? And, again, Biden's out there making some excuses, and he was full of excuses for the governors. But the fact is, this doesn't look good. And I called it an unforced error yesterday, and I'm going to say that again, because he's the one who said we're going to have 500 million tests. 500 million tests.
Yeah.
He said that in his speech last week.
You should have never said anything.
Right. And so this is, you want to talk about what I was saying, bureaucratic screw-ups like the DMV, 2 block long lines.
Yeah.
Seem like a pretty good example of that to me. That I really do think that this is going to end up, and it may not be reflected in the poll numbers yet, but it's going to. Now, by the way, I read another interesting article. We'll get to George in a couple minutes. But they were talking about the guy whose job it used to be at the Fed is to predict disaster. There's a guy, and he's retired now. But he was warning people, look, having no interest rate, which is what we had, right, for a long time.
Yeah. Yep, zero.
Is going to have dire consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's no white knight coming to the Biden administration on the economy. It's going to get worse. Right? Am I right about that?
Oh,
or am
I agree.
I being a negative?
I agree. Yeah, it's going to get worse.
Because I would hate to be a nattering nabob of negativism, to quote.
Listen, you and I are probably the only 2 people who know what that means and where it came from.
But you explain to people because there's a Greek.
Yes, this was something that former Vice President Spiro T. Agnew, Richard Nixon's first vice president, said in a press conference when he was complaining about the media. He said that the media were not doing their jobs as journalists. They were nothing more than nattering nabobs of negativism, which the media thought was hilarious. And it's sort of stuck in the political vernacular ever since.
And I just think it's a good turn of phrase. First off, it's got alliteration, and I like that. But but far be it from me to be a nattering nabob of negativism. I don't want to be that. But I think the Biden administration, fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy ride, right?
Right.
And I say that without, I'm not building in political bias. I really do think it's going to be bad for the Biden administration. And I'm not sure they're ready to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And another area where things could get negative, we'll be talking to George Samuel right after this about what's going on as the further situation between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. Because this is really not, this is more. We are, And by the way, you saw we're sending more arms to Ukraine, right?
Yes. Yes, indeed.
So we'll ask George. I think this situation is about a third Russia, a third Ukraine, and a third U.S. Maybe a quarter Russia, a quarter Ukraine, a quarter U.S., and a quarter NATO. Because the Brits are involved in there somewhere too. But it's not just Russia, Ukraine, I don't think. Anyway, we'll be talking to George about this after this short break on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back and on 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. And, John, you know, one thing we'll talk about next hour a little bit. I was talking about the negative forecast for the Biden administration, but I'm going to ask you, we'll talk to Carter Laren about it, too. I'm actually looking forward. I expect to have a good year, personally, me. Does that make sense? In other words, forget I'm not in the Biden administration, and nobody should be so into politics. Maybe some people down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, sure them, but we'll talk. And you know what? Maybe I'm foolishly optimistic. Maybe I'm jinxing myself. We'll talk to Carter about it, and about and I'll explain why too. I want to talk about it because I heard something interesting. Joining us now, you know, it's nice to have someone who's got a PhD, a doctor, but, you know, we're not going to ask him COVID stuff. George Samuel is also a great political analyst, but he does have a PhD, John. You know that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yes, credentialed. I feel, you know, he's a little out of our league, and mine anyway. He may be in your league. That's possible. Hey, George, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Lee? How are you, John?
Welcome back. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah, we're well.
I like your comments about the nattering nabobs of negativism. It was William Safire who coined that term because he was working for Spiro Agnew at the time.
That's right. You know what? That's a great point. I forgot that. William Safire, who went on to become highly respected conservative columnist and commentator, was a speechwriter at the White House, first for Agnew and then for Nixon.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he had other alliterations. You know, pusillanimous pussyfooting was another one.
That's right.
Yeah. No, Agnew's alliterations were at a high level sometimes. And yeah, Sapphire, who, you know, well-known political speechwriter and lover of a good turn of phrase, certainly. Yeah, I'd forgotten that as well. So thanks for reminding us. Now, George, I'm so glad you're on today, because the situation between Russia and Ukraine, let's start with what I said earlier. Do you agree with me that Russia and Ukraine are maybe, between the two of those nations, 50% of this current conflict, and it's really being egged on by the U.S., Great Britain, NATO, and so on and so forth? Do you agree with me, or are my numbers way off there?
I agree with you, and I think that, but there's a more serious aspect to it, which is that the NATO expansion, which has been going on since 1991, and the Russians have put up with it. You know, they were very unhappy with it. They put up with it because basically they were just too weak to be able to mount any kind of effective resistance to it. All they've been able to do is to complain continually. But now they've suddenly put down a marker. They feel strong. They feel very confident now in regard to the West. And they said, enough. We're not putting up with it anymore. You continue to expand. You try to bring Ukraine into NATO as a de facto member, and we will act. And we will act unilaterally, and we will act without warning. And I think it's a very serious situation. I mean, it's the Russians themselves who bring up the Cuban Missile Crisis, because they're saying, you know, our attitude is exactly the same as Kennedy's attitude was to the missiles in Cuba, which is it's an existential threat to us, what you're doing to Ukraine. And so just as Kennedy issued an ultimatum to Khrushchev, either you take the missiles out or we will, but they're going out. So they're saying the same thing in Ukraine. Either you take all your stuff out from Ukraine, all of your heavy arms, your specialists, your missiles, everything. Either you take all that out or we will. And there's nothing much that you're going to be able to do about that, because NATO is not going to in any position to fight against Russia in Ukraine. And therefore, they're just, you know, they're going to have to lump it and suffer humiliation. So I think there is a serious issue between Russia and Ukraine at the moment, but there's an even more serious confrontation that's taking place now between Russia and NATO.
I want to ask you about warning signs. I wrote a piece about 2 years ago in which this was during a kerfuffle that we were having with the Iranians. And I said that what we were hearing coming out of the White House was just talk. It was nothing more than talk. If we were serious about attacking Iran, it would happen once we got at least one carrier battle group into the Persian Gulf, and probably another one in the Indian Ocean or in the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean. And that never happened. Are there similar warning signs that we should be looking for around Ukraine, perhaps in the Black Sea, if we were serious about escalating this thing and actually fighting? What would those warning signs look like?
Well, I think that the West, the United States, is just simply not serious about fighting. I mean, this goes back to Hungary in '56, Czechoslovakia in '68. You know, when push comes to shove, when the Russians put down a marker, the West backs down. It was always ridiculous to start issuing all of these guarantees to you know, the newly joined NATO member states, but it was even more ludicrous when the United States and the UK started suggesting that they were ready to fight on behalf of Ukraine. It was laughable, and they assumed that Russia would continue to back down. But what has changed is, I think, Russia now has a certain strategic superiority with these hypersonic weapons, but even more serious from the West point of view is this alliance. Effectively, it's an alliance with China. And so suddenly it's the West that finds itself isolated because it's confronting the possibility of a two-front war. So not only are they far too weak to take on Russia in the Black Sea or around Ukraine, but there's also a possibility that China could open up a second front in Taiwan. I mean, that statement that the Chinese issued after that video conference with Putin, in which they said, we, Russia and China, must do more to support each other's core security interests. That's pretty much saying, yeah, we're going to do what we can to support Russia's core security interests. That was a message to the West that, if you start anything with Russia, we are ready to open up a second front. And it might be quite an opportune time for China, because it could be an opportune moment to resolve the Taiwan issue once and for all.
Well, and okay, so let's leave aside. You're doing a great job, of course, of pointing out the military possibilities, but another one here is the economics of Russia and China at this point. Unlike the first Cold War, China is now an economic power. And John, you must have seen, maybe it made it, maybe you saw it as well, George. The sanctions were threatening. The big headline here in the U.S. was Russia might lose the iPhone. You saw that, right, John?
No, that's awesome. See, this is why sanctions are so stupid.
No, and I saw this multiple places that Russia might lose the iPhone. But when I was in London a few years ago, I was in Piccadilly Circus. And, there's all kinds of advertising there. And I saw a billboard for Huawei phones. And I'd never seen such a thing over here. Here in the U.S., John, now you're special. You might know somebody. Do you know anybody with a Huawei phone? Anybody?
No, nobody.
Me
I've never
neither.
seen one.
But in England, it was another brand like Apple, like Samsung, right? And I saw Huawei. And you know what? The Chinese made Huawei phones. One of the reasons that you don't know, and I don't know anybody either, and I know some nerds, is because we have tried to keep them out, and I'll bet it's because they're pretty damn good phones. And so what I'm saying is Russia, on this one small issue, for instance, if they take the iPhones away completely, you know what? I'll bet China would love to have Russia be another Huawei country. So, George, does this make any sense that the economics are completely different than they were during the Cold War, where, Russia was having to prop up the Chinese economy back in the 40s and 50s and so on. But things are very different now economically, are they not?
No, that's absolutely. And the sanctions that the West imposed on Russia since 2014 haven't done any good for the West at all. In fact, it's actually hurt the West. It hurt Western agriculture because they had big markets in Russia. Russia became pretty much now self-sufficient in agriculture. In fact, Russia is now a big exporter of agriculture. So, French farmers were really hurt by the sanctions. But now they're saying, oh, we're going to really, really hit you with sanctions. So we're going to kick you out of the SWIFT financial transaction system. Well, the Russians have been making preparations for that for several years now. They've known for some time that this was coming, that they were going to be kicked out of the SWIFT system. And they and the Chinese have already developed alternative transaction systems. They're not dependent upon the dollar, and so they're trading in national currencies. So none of that is going to hurt a military confrontation in Ukraine. I think the West will suffer a huge humiliation. And once they suffer that humiliation, then the question arises, well, what use were the guarantees that were issued to the Baltic states? I mean, really? I mean, is the United States ready to escalate to a nuclear war over Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia? Well, not really. I mean, these things were just handed out